I really wish that we had not started these projects. Eight years ago, we were searching for a boat that would take us around the world. But within that search, a lot of the boats that were coming up had some major problems, and problems that were way outside of our budget, our time constraints, and our expertise to fix. But luckily, in the end, we found Florence, who didn't have any of those major problems and fitted within our budget.
However, now, after sailing over 50,000 miles to visit 40 countries around the world, some of those major problems are appearing on Florence. And if we want to continue cruising her to more challenging environments, we now have to face some of those problems that 8 years ago we would have run away from.
Join us as we turn our beautiful blue water cruiser into a wreck and share some of the lessons that we learned along the way.
Last time we hauled Florence out of the water on a sunny day. But the season is changing, winter is coming, and we have some serious work to do both on deck and below. With storm-force winds, heavy rainfall and freezing temperatures on the way, if we are to set sail again, we need to get moving to somewhere less exposed.
We've known for over a year that we were going to need to do some serious work on Florence this winter. So we looked around for a boatyard which was close to family, but also had space to put Florence inside and out of the weather. It's a ticklish business fitting Florence in amongst the other yachts undercover, and a game of Tetris for the yard to fit in as many as possible, while still giving everybody enough room to work around their boats.
So here we are in the shed. Florence has got a roof over her head, possibly for the first time since she was built. And we're in here. It isn't extravagance to be in here. We're paying quite a bit more money to be in here than to be out in the yard. But with the British weather and the coming winter, this, we hope, is just going to enable us to get on and get a lot of jobs done. And especially because we've got a lot of jobs that we need to do on deck, which the boat needs to be dry for. And outside, that was just not going to happen. You may have noticed that our rudder is looking very different to how when we came out of the water. We've already been doing a lot of work on this. We've actually been out on the hard for a week, and we scraped back all the anti-foul, sanded, and we knew we had some osmosis on the rudder, so all those bits have been ground out. But we're going to leave that now, because that is now all going to dry out for a couple of months whilst we work on the deck. So you can see we've actually already removed the pulpit up here in preparation for working on the tow rail. So this is a tow rail, runs all the way down the boat. It stops your toes slipping off when you're out on deck, but it also has all these holes in it which are useful for attaching all the blocks wherever we want to along the boat. But the problem we've got is that when we took all the panels down inside, which we'll show you in a minute, we found there's been a lot of leaking water from underneath the tow rail, and we've also got some problems with the corrosion on the tow rail. So this whole section, which has got hundreds of bolts holding it in, all needs to come off, and then we may need to replace it. We're going to have a look at what state it's in, whether or not we can fix it up and reuse it, or whether we need to replace the whole thing. So this is a major job, and it results in a lot of holes all the way along the deck. So that's one of the real reasons that we are in this shed. So this is the first section that we're going to try and remove, because it's already got a cut here. So it's only just over, well, maybe 1.5 meters long. So it's going to give us our first see at how easy it is to come off. And we've now removed all of the bolts along here. So it's just held on with sealant, but it's pretty strong. So now we're going to try and cut through the sealant and try and get that off this morning. So down below in Florence we have actually removed most of the headlining panels and side panels inside the cupboards and everywhere so that we can get to all of these bolts which run down the entire length of the boat. And when we got behind here, we actually took this headlining panel down and there was some wet patches or damp patches on the back of it. And you can see these are all the bolts that hold the tow rail on, but in some places certainly you can see runs down the side where the water's come in. But if you look really, really carefully beside this penny washer on the bottom of the bolt, you can actually see the half moon shape of another hole. And that you can actually see where the watermark is, that's actually where it's been leaking from. But on a bolt further forward, they didn't have any space for the washer. So if you look at this one, you can actually see the hole next to the new bolt. And this actually still feels wet. But that's where it's been leaking, and you can see the leak all down here. So those are the old holes, we think, from when she had a previous tow rail on, or when this tow rail was put on back on in a slightly different place. And they weren't sealed, and that's where we got the leaks. Although I'm talking to you on the camera and I'm pointing things out, Amy is holding the camera, and it may look like this is just me doing this work, but it's not. This is all 50-50. We're both working flat out on the whole boat together. As I cut that off, you can just see the tow rail just starting to lift up as the sealant releases it. You can actually get the thing all the way through now and just cut the remaining bits. Oh. Yeah, so it's taken about 2 hours to get to this point, so it's quite a big job. But it is coming. At some point this is going to ping off. And there are little bits under here that are corroded, so that's what we need to look at. We're going to have to clean all of this up, clean all of that up. And this isn't the worst bit, but at least it shows that we can get it off, get it all off, clean it all up, have a look at it and decide what it is we can do. Can we rescue it, or do we need to replace it?
We're now multiple days into the project of removing our tow rail. It's taken longer than anticipated because we couldn't access all of the bolts down below at one time, and so we've had to move it around whilst we're working on other jobs down below.
Hello. One of the things we were really worried about with removing the tow rail from the boat was getting all of the nuts and bolts out of it so that we could actually lift it up. And actually so far it's been a lot easier than we thought it was going to be. Right now I'm in the forepeak on top of the shelf. This is one of the easier places to get to. And most of the bolts have come out, apart from a few, but we've found a really nifty trick for getting them out. From on top, they're just a slotted head screw, and when you put the screwdriver in it, it slips out, and it's really difficult to get enough purchase on it to actually turn them. But from down below, if you would ease the first nut off, and put a second nut on the bolt, and then nip the two nuts up together, using 2 spanners, then you can actually wedge one nut against the second nut, and then that gives you it wedged onto the bolt, and you can use all the leverage of the spanner to turn the screw. And we found that all of them so far have actually come out.
But we're now at the stage where we have removed all of the bolts. I think I've got over 160 from here, and I've been working to cut back the Sikaflex. So I've been going from each end. I borrowed some of the yard's wedges and we've sharpened up a paint scraper so that we're able to cut the Sikaflex, and it's been working really well. So we're now at the point where we've just got about 1 metre long section where the Sikaflex is still holding the tow rail onto the deck. But the trouble is that this section is actually the weakest point. There's a break in the tow rail which has been cut to allow water to drain out. So now we've got to try and get this section off without breaking it. There we go.
Okay.
That's off.
It's off.
We won't go any further because of that. That's a massive relief to have got such a big section of the tow rail off, but now it's off, we can see just how bad the corrosion is and what a problem it's been. So you can see on this section, this is where the stanchion base is, and it's really obvious how much of the stanchion base has been in contact with the aluminium. Stainless steel stanchion in contact with aluminium is obviously corroded. And there are some other bits along the tow rail which are obviously corroded, but the reason that they're corroded isn't quite so obvious. What we think has caused these bits is when we were stuck in Indonesia for so long over COVID, we weren't able to get our anchor chain re-galvanized, and it was incredibly rusty. And every time we were lifting the anchor, flakes of rusty anchor chain were being washed down the deck. And because we've had this other corrosion from the stanchions, we think there's been a leak under the tow rail, and some of those bits of metal from the anchor chain have got underneath the tow rail and then started to corrode the tow rail from underneath. Here we can see a hole which actually started as a tiny pinprick of corrosion, but it's only since taking the tow rail off and being able to see the underneath, we're able to see that the corrosion is much bigger on the underside, and that's where the corrosion has been coming from. That's obviously then made a much bigger space underneath the tow rail and made the leaks even worse, and is the reason that we've had to take this tow rail off in order to fix the problem. So this is the short section that we took off the front, and we've been able to get some dimensions from this. But the trouble is that it's not just as simple as simply buying some more new tow rail off the shelf. I'm finding it really difficult to source this particular type of tow rail. The only tow rail available in the UK off the shelf is too small to fit on the side of Florence. So in order to refurbish this tow rail, we would first have to remove all of the Sikaflex from underneath, and then any areas where the corrosion is really bad, we'll cut those out and we'll have new sections of aluminium welded into them. And then we'll remove the anodizing, there's a company that does that, have the tow rail grit blasted or bead blasted, and then put in a bath to have it re-anodized, and then hopefully stick it back on Florence all shiny and new with all of the screw holes already in the right place. That's the plan.
Well, no. We actually went through the whole process of working out what we'd have to do and how much it would cost to refurbish the tow rail, including visiting anodizers and welders. But ultimately, it was going to be very expensive and time consuming to refurbish the tow rail, but also what we got at the end probably wouldn't even look that good. So we bit the bullet and decided to replace the whole tow rail with new.
But as I've mentioned before, finding new tow rail is not easy. I've actually spent days trying to find a tow rail that will fit the side of Florence. I've even looked at importing some from the States, but they were quoting £1,500 just for the delivery. I've eventually found one that I could possibly import from Italy. The company that did so even sent me a sample, and they promised that we could have the tow rail within 4 weeks. So I bought it and paid for it, and it felt like we were getting somewhere.
But 3 weeks into that 4-week lead time, we still didn't have any written confirmation from the company, despite the fact that we paid them. Amy chased them, and it transpired that they hadn't paid their bills with the Italian company that made the tow rail, so they wouldn't be getting any deliveries. Thankfully, we did manage to get our money back out of the company, but we were back to square one.
So that left us with only one other option, and that's actually for some tow rail which is identical to that we have on board Florence at the moment, but was twice the price of the Italian import. But really, we didn't feel like we had any other options, so we went ahead and ordered that. And at the time of ordering, we were promised that that would be with us in a maximum of 4 weeks. That was 5 weeks ago.
The tow rail situation is causing us many sleepless nights, but there is no time to dwell on it. On to the next job.
So the next major job on the list is also one of the reasons that we are inside this shed. We need to remove all of our deck grip. And that is all of this grey non-skid, which is covering all of the coach roof on Florence and all of the side decks. We believe that it's actually original to Florence, so when she was built in 1985. We had originally thought that we could just replace a couple of sections that were degrading badly, but in the last year, the whole deck has just started to deteriorate, and it's really at the point now where it just needs to be totally removed and we start afresh. This deck grip has done a fantastic job. There is not a time in our entire circumnavigation around the world that either of us have slipped. Although I have to admit that it's not my favourite aesthetically. I think it makes Florence look a little bit like a tank. So hopefully we're going to find something which gives as good a grip as we've had, but is a bit more aesthetically pleasing and makes Florence a little more sailing boat-like rather than tank-like. The really difficult thing with this job is going to be making sure that we remove all of the deck grip without damaging the gel coat which is underneath. Got some sharpened scrapers and a rubber mallet. I'm hoping this is going to be good enough for the job. You can get vibrating tools which would make the job a lot quicker, but I'm concerned that by doing that then it might cause more damage to the gel coat underneath. So just going to have to do this manually and put in the hours and the hard work to get anything off. It is absolutely howling outside and also pouring down with rain, so it's a really great day to be doing a job like this inside a shed, because not only is the deck not getting wet, but all of the bits of the deck aren't flying around and I'm able to contain the mess a little bit more. So it's taken about 3 days for me to get chip off the deck grip from the side decks, and now we're left with this epoxy and the remains of the underneath of the deck. So this is really tough to get off. I'm gonna have to get Matt's help, and he's gonna go across it with a surf arm to try and get the really uneven lumps off first, and then it's gonna need sanding back with a really, like maybe 60 grit sandpaper, really rough sandpaper. Unfortunately, when we've done that, the job isn't finished because we need to move all of the stuff that we've been storing on the coach roof and also take off the deck grip from the coach roof. So start this process all over again.
We've got rid of all of the deck grip off of the side decks, but now we've got to do the coach roof. And this is the reality of boat work in England in the winter. It's currently 2 degrees, it's flipping freezing. Ice all over the car on the way in this morning. And yeah, we're outside on deck. At least we're inside the shed, but it's 2 degrees inside here.
Yeah, but it being so cold means that epoxy won't go off and paint won't go off. So this is the perfect job to be doing today because it's not temperature dependent. We're finally able to see some progress on Florence. We have literally just finished sanding back the decks. I'm still covered in dust from doing so, but we have got all of the treadmaster off and sanded back. And from a distance, it probably looks really good, but unfortunately we've got lots of divots in the gel coat, which we need to touch up before we can then paint when the weather is a bit warmer. This has been a mammoth job. We've been working flat out 7 days a week. We've just been putting in all of the hours that we can and going home pretty knackered at the end of every day. So just the coach roof with both of us working solidly on it took a day between us to chip it off, and then 2 days to sand and get all of the kind of little more difficult corners off as well. I really wish that we had not started these projects. They've both been so much more difficult than we anticipated and taken about 3 times as long as they should have done. I think I was going to do this again. I would at all costs avoid removing the tow rail in the first place. I think we could have probably just lifted it and put the sealant back into the places where we were getting the leaks, and then just put up with the fact that it didn't look so good. And that would have meant that by this stage in our refit, we were a lot further along. And I think if I was going to do the deck grip again, I would also not be quite so careful about trying to fit within the lines that we had our previous Treadmaster in and protect the gel coat around it. And I would just have a heavy grade sandpaper. I'd attach an industrial sander to it, and I would just, instead of chipping off the Treadmaster, go at it with about a 40 grit sandpaper, and it would create one hell of a mess. We'd have had to tent the entire of Florence in order to do that, but I think it would have been the quickest and the easiest way of getting that stuff off.
Next time we have some positivity on board, with the joy of having our new tow rail arrive. But that leaves us with the challenge of fitting it ourselves. Subscribe to see how we get on bending a 9-metre length of aluminium tow rail to Florence's curve.
For extra updates in between these bi-weekly videos, and to find out what we're up to in real time, head over to Patreon and join the crew. Of course, don't forget to subscribe to make sure that you don't miss the next episode here on YouTube.
Continuing our voyage on Florence would not be possible without the support of our patrons. Thank you to all of you, and especially to our star patrons.